Welcome back to Left Without Borders. I am Janet, and I am here with Commie Trucker, and we are here with Eddie Smith. He is big over on the TikTok, and he's on Twitter, right? You're Midwestern Marks, or what is it?
Yeah, our ad is actually Marks Midwest, but everywhere else we're Midwestern Marks.
Okay, all right. So on TikTok, you're Midwestern Marks, and then on Twitter, you're Marks Midwest.
Yeah.
That's where you can find him. And I was kind of happy to meet you because this is the first time I'm meeting Eddie. When I went on TikTok 2 years ago, it was a vast land of people just dancing and a bunch of liberal stuff. And then I couldn't find, and then I found Eddie, and I was like, then I felt like I was stalking him because I was like watching everything and I'm liking it. I was like, oh my God, he's going to like think I'm some whack job. I'm not a whack. Well, we can decide that later. So I'm very happy to meet you, and I'm glad that you're joining us. Eddie writes articles, and he wrote an article on Bill Gates and his farmland. So we're gonna just jump into that, I guess. I'm gonna start off with a quote. Eddie probably is familiar with this quote, and I'm going to make one observation off the quote, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions following the quote. So this was Bill Gates during a Reddit AMA in March of 2021, and he was asked why he was buying up all this farmland. And his answer was, my investment group chose to do this. It is not connected to climate. The agriculture sector is important. With more productive seeds, we can avoid deforestation and help Africa deal with the climate difficulty they already face. It is unclear how cheap biofuels can be, but if they are cheap, it can solve the aviation and truck emissions. So my comment on that is, he starts off saying it's not connected to climate, and then he brings up like climate like a couple of times there. So like that was kind of weird and confusing. But anyhow, so why exactly is he doing this? And what exactly is he doing, and why is he doing this is basically the first major question, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, he's strangely incoherent when he talks about these things, which you'd think he'd be better at this point, at spewing propaganda based on what he's doing. But, he says out loud what he really wants to do a lot of the time, which is make profit for himself and other investors, people who own stocks in fertilizer companies or multinational corporations who sell agriculture equipment. Which, he's basically giving African farmers, rather than giving them money, he's giving them loans, which they have to pay back with interest, which is leading to a lot of them being debt trapped, but not before they can buy a bunch of materials from these Western multinationals that Bill Gates has his hands in. And climate change is really just a rhetorical tactic for him. I've noticed he brings in climate change to deflect from any criticism. So recently there was this summit held in Rwanda, where a bunch of agricultural experts and health policy experts from Africa and around the globe came together and criticized Bill Gates and these investment groups and said, what you're doing here is wrong. You're not actually trying to help us. You're trying to make profit. And then there was also a progress report released by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation themselves that said the so-called green revolution in Africa has failed to hit any of its intended goals. But Bill Gates just shrugs his shoulders and says the problem is climate change. The problem is climate change and that we haven't invested enough money. We haven't gone far enough. Yeah. So then just recently he invested $200 million more in the Green Revolution, which is now rebranded and changed its name. They're going by AGRA now, which is just an abbreviation. But yeah, I mean, his response to them saying that your fertilizer poisoned our land and you've been debt trapping our farmers was to offer their farmers more loans and more fertilizer and then just blame everything on climate change, which is absurd to anyone paying attention. But, the Western media completely ignored that summit in Rwanda and the criticisms of Gates that people are making. So.
Can you speak on why Bill Gates is focusing on monocropping and what effects that has on the agriculture industry in Africa?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure of the specifics, but I know generally like imperialist agriculture, like this agriculture dominated by Western multinationals, tends to be monocropic, because they're more focused on producing a high volume of commodities, which then they can use to make surplus and profit, rather than, making diverse crops, which are going to be nutritious for the people in that country to eat. Obviously they couldn't care less. So they end up coming in and setting up these massive, like one of the classic examples is the United Fruit Corporation in Guatemala and Central America. And they produce, just the same kind of fruit monocropically on the soil forever and ever and ever. In Cuba, they did it with sugar, which is why the Soviet Union bought, an insane amount of sugar from Cuba, much more than they ever needed. It was just to lend Cuba a helping hand. But their soil had become monocropic from years of the colonialists just growing this one crop, which the soil adapts to. And, it's very hard to overcome that. And Cuba has come up with a lot of really innovative methods. They've needed to because of the U.S. embargo to get around this monocropic soil that the colonialists have stuck them with. But
yeah, they do a lot of urban gardening now too. Like they had like some Australians came in and showed them how to use like all the little plots of land that are in the cities and stuff, and they're just growing food in all these places now. So Cuba's been doing a lot of that too. So that's kind of neat. But I so the they use it's kind of like the Monsanto thing. They use like specialized seeds too, right? And they're saying that they're more nutritious, but so for me, I have a lymphatic condition, and all the toxins that are like in our foods and stuff have like actually hurt me, and so I have to try to be organic and stuff. And so it worries me too when they're sitting there saying they're man making these to like, oh, we're going to give them more nutrients in the seed. And I don't see how that is good either. And for the land either, because it's not natural. It's not naturally growing these things. It's using other things to promote growth and promote certain things in the fruit or vegetable and stuff like that. So that kind of irks me a little. And but they're doing he is now the biggest farmer in United States. And so is he planning on doing the same thing here? And that concerns a lot of the small farms, right?
Yeah, and I can't remember what the stat is. It's something like 200 small farms in the U.S. are going under every year, as Bill Gates is increasing the amount of land he owns in the Midwest and everywhere across the entire U.S. And I don't know the science behind the fertilizer that the African agriculture experts said poisoned their soil or the seeds. Yeah. But they do say it did. And Bill Gates is a huge promoter of GMOs and just modified seeds and scientifically modified farming equipment and agriculture in general. So really what the policy experts in Africa said was that they tried to use Western industrialized agriculture models, on Africa, which weren't suited for the African soil. So I imagine it's exactly what you said, these seeds that they had genetically modified weren't suited for the soil. And, we don't know that these are the healthiest anyways. And, what's unfortunate now, I'm studying healthcare administration in grad school, and a lot of these studies that go into agricultural policy decisions or healthcare policy decisions are funded by people like Bill Gates, who are invested in these healthcare companies or healthcare conglomerates. So they influence the studies in various ways, studies on nutrition and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, and that would be an issue too. Like, I mean, because he has so much money in different stuff, so he wants to make as much money as possible. So, okay, now he doesn't care if it's healthy farming. He cares about profit, as you said at the beginning. So, did you have anything you wanted to ask him now?
Just that the amount of poverty in Africa. Do you think that he's using his philanthropy and entrepreneurship to boost his own image in the West by exploiting the poverty in Africa to make more money? What basically is he using that as a double bonus to boost?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what's kind of sick about this, is that he's using philanthropy, charity as a tool of colonialism. And I mean, the capitalists have always used philanthropy or charity that way, because capitalism's always been an anarchic system that can't provide for everyone. So there's always a need for things like food, and, money to be raised for these things. And capitalists can always come in and say, I am so generous, take, some of my wealth, that I'm hoarding and really am exploiting people and being the cause of the inequality that we're seeing, but pretend that they're combating the inequality. And in Africa, during COVID and since the war in Ukraine started, malnutrition rates have been going up. Poverty rates have been going up. The opposite of what Bill Gates has said was going to happen has happened, despite him dumping all this money in there, which is proof that, that money's not actually going to help people. Meanwhile, his profits are going up and the amount that he's investing in this is going up. Since Bill Gates promised to give away half of his wealth, his net worth has doubled, which is just hilarious. So it works as a way for them to colonize and exploit people, and a way for them to boost their public image.
I remember when he had to put $3.2 billion into the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because he screwed up here. Like, he screwed up just in his, like having the monopoly and all that stuff. And that, I mean, that was the whole thing. He used Bill and Melinda Gates. Like, he had a foundation before that didn't have Melinda's name on it. And then all of a sudden it was Bill and Melinda Gates, and he dumped all this money, and it was all for image. I mean, that's what they do. They just do it for image. And then we all seem to forget, like the public seems to forget. And Bill Gates is great. He's helping Africa.
These kinds of foundations, like, what's the Clinton Foundation? Yeah,
I was going to bring that up too.
Use charities as a way to launder their own cash back to them.
Exactly.
This reminds me of I'm sorry, his exploitation of the impoverished in Africa. It reminds me of these micro loans that have been going on there, and that, while presented as a charitable way to help small families, impoverished families get by, was really just an excuse to bring in these predatory lenders so that they could harass these families and take off wealth.
Yeah, and that's one of the other criticisms that African policy experts made at that summit in Rwanda of Gates, was that he's not, giving us wealth to buy agricultural infrastructure. He's giving farmers credits, which is just loans from Western banks that they have to pay back with interest. So if they're not extremely successful in growing food, which they haven't been because the fertilizer's been poisonous and the seeds haven't been, growing like they wanted them to, then these farmers aren't able to pay back the loans and they spiral into debt. And then Bill Gates's his interview that he did with the New York Times 3 or 4 days after that summit was held, he said the only reason the Green Revolution hasn't worked is because of, 1, climate change, and 2, we need to go further. We need 1, more credits, and 2, more fertilizer, which were the main 2 things that the experts at the summit were saying, have not worked. We do not need more of, that's leading people to get debt trapped and just making companies a bunch of money. So it's almost like he admitted it in that interview with the New York Times, that everything that the experts said in the summit was true. But nobody heard about the summit because Western media just ignored it. So Bill
I only
Gates.
heard about it when I read your article.
All right.
There's a part in the article where you say that Gates kind of, he said that he thinks Africans are unable to pull themselves out of poverty, like the Chinese did, which I find a little dog whistly. I read into things, but I mean, like to me, like that just seems like, why don't you think the Africans can actually succeed? And plus, like China, like explain what China did. Like explain you talk about the visible and the invisible hand. Explain all that in this.
How does China's industrialization of Africa differ from the Gates Foundation?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Two good questions. First of all, China has been, they were a semi-feudal country, so they had peasants, and, like feudal lords ruling over the peasants before the Communist Party overthrew the colonizers, alongside the Kuomintang nationalists, and then defeated the U.S.-backed Kuomintang nationalists in a civil war. So they needed to industrialize their country and really just increase the productive forces, that would be like the Marxist terminology for what they had to do. Increase their ability to produce. They didn't have steel production in the country. They needed, to get the infrastructure to do that and also train up workers in how to do that. And that would lead into other, construction projects. So all these needed to be carried out, and have needed to be carried out in China. But when industrialization was happening in the US or in Britain, tons of people were thrown into homelessness, into poverty. You had the enclosure of the commons where the peasants were increasingly pushed into the cities, and were living in really ragged conditions. Whereas China has taken all these efforts to alleviate that. So they've been able to industrialize and become a modern, productive economy, while also abolishing poverty. And that's, poverty for 1.4 billion people, the most populous country on the planet, which is, shows how ridiculous Bill Gates's claim is that Africa can't do the same thing because their population is still growing. That's what Gates says. And there's no evidence to that. There's no facts to that. China's got, an enormous population. It's just that Bill Gates wants to push this depopulation ideology on Africa, which is really creepy and scary. But yeah, China has what they call it is the visible hand. So they have allowed foreign investment into their country. So Western corporations have made money on China, making it harder for them to sanction China, the U.S. government. And yeah, it just made them more of a friend to the U.S. government for years until they got more powerful. But it did allow more market activity, more capitalism in China. So that's what they call the invisible hand. What the visible hand is these centralized government economic plans, or these party cadres who are in charge of every geographic area, making sure that they have water and food and shelter. And then in later years, making sure that they have things like Wi-Fi. And then most of the most powerful banks and industries in China are owned by the government. And they use the surplus of those industries to reinvest in the people of China, developing infrastructure, social safety nets, things like that. And then even the biggest private companies in China, there are Communist Party members sitting on the board, making sure that every decision they make is in line with the party's central plans, which are designed to help the people and bring about what they call common prosperity, in this very low stage of socialism, as they're transitioning out of capitalism. And what China's done to try and combat a lot of the U.S. debt trapping in Africa, which has left Africa and Latin America highly underdeveloped, and not industrialized the way that China has been able to industrialize. China's offering them developmental loans. So rather than taking out loans with the IMF or World Bank, these Western financial institutions, promoted by people like Bill Gates, who are just want to trap countries in the global South in debt, China's offering very low interest rate loans. The interest rates on these developmental loans that China's offering all across the global south are about 4%, which is the same interest rate on the loans that the U.S. gave to West Europe during the Marshall Plan after World War II, and much of their infrastructure was destroyed in the fighting. Because the U.S. wanted a trade partner. They wanted to build up their allies so they'd have someone to trade with in a mutually beneficial way. And that's all China's doing in the global south, and the U.S. is driving the U.S. crazy. And what's funny is they're pointing at China and saying they're debt trapping, and it's just pure projection.
Didn't recently just forgive several countries' debts?
Yeah, a bunch of them, like 17 or something.
Yeah, I was thinking almost 20. United States was pointing fingers, saying, why don't you forgive all these loans? And then they're like, okay, 14% of the loans to African countries are owned by China. And while the vast majority are United States and World Bank loans to Africa, why aren't they forgiving the loans? But China leads by example.
The recent crisis in Sri Lanka was the craziest example, because the U.S. media was saying, China caused this. They caused this crisis via debt trapping. And then Ben Norton of Multipolarista did a breakdown of who owns Sri Lanka's debt. And China owned less than 10% of it, and 90% of it was owned by Western banks, and they had completely caused the crisis. And even, there was a Western U.S.-owned bank called the Asian Development Bank or something. So, the tentacles of U.S. banks and the IMF and World Bank stretch all around the world.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so there's concern with, because now he owns 270,000 acres in the United States. That's like bigger than some of the tribe lands, and some of that land, like Ted Turner has land that's actually near Fort Laramie that's belongs to the Lakota. You know what I mean? Like so that they're buying all this up, and that's the concern, is that they're just going to destroy this land, which it does. So if you're in farmland and you have your own farm and you're trying to farm like organically or more natural, not using these, genetically modified seeds, it doesn't matter, because if all your neighbors are using them, it just sinks into your soil. And so it's really, it's really hard to do like organic and stuff like that, because you have to like pay attention to what's coming into your soil, and that could be your neighbor's farm.
And Monsanto has agents that come in disguises to test your crops and see if their seed found its way over to your crops. They will sue you for using their seeds and make you pay.
Yeah,
it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. So I mean, I just feel like it's just, this whole thing is just gonna, it's going to really hurt the farming industry, because, and then you take it like the small farms and the way that indigenous people of this land farm doesn't hurt the soil. And what you're saying, they use the monocrop, they just keep growing the same thing. I mean, I have my own little garden. I know to move my stuff around. Like, I know I do that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but they'll just keep growing stuff. And in his big thought process, because he brings up in that quote that I read, he brings up the biofuel, right? So his main concern is probably growing, stuff for like corn, and just growing corn, like stuff for biofuel, not really for food, if that's his main concern. And I don't know. I mean, it's just horrible. But
only the perversity of capitalism could look at a continent racked with poverty and say, there's some good money-making opportunities there. Let's go and tear it up. It's just absolutely inane.
Yeah. And they're just going to pick up all the, like, what do we have? We have Blackstone like buying all the houses, and now they're picking up all the land. it doesn't look too bright for, young folk getting houses and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's so ridiculous what's going on right now.
Yeah, because I mean, every industry is privatized and, it's organized and run for profit by, an increasingly small number or a concentrated, number of oligarchs. You mentioned BlackRock. You have like Vanguard Group, BlackRock, and then in healthcare, you have like CVS Group and United Health Group. These conglomerates of just a handful of investors who have their hands in everything. They own everything, and they're increasingly buying up farmland, housing. And it just goes to show that there is no sovereignty or democracy without economic sovereignty. There's no real democracy unless the people own, the sources of food, the agriculture, the industry, other things like, the shelter, the housing. If these aren't owned by the people and the people aren't making decisions with these things, then they're going to be used for profit and they're going to be used to hurt the people, and organized in the completely irrational way that we see today. And yeah, and the indigenous is a good example. Like, the liberal establishment and the Democrats can give as much lip service as they want to indigenous people. But until, that you're returning the land to them, and allowing them to control production, the economy, there is no real sovereignty and of course the politics. But, you can't control the politics without controlling the economy because the capitalists just will run everything.
Yeah.
Yep. You can, liberals will cheer and shout with joy when an indigenous person makes their way on a TV show, but then vote for a candidate that has a D next to their name, but will still run an oil pipeline through their land.
Yeah.
It's just all superficial.
Yeah. They don't care. I mean, all they know is Democrat. Like, I just vote for the Democrat. And whatever Democrats that the establishment Democrats want me to vote for, not, that's all it's become. And it just goes around and around, and you try to talk to them, and it's just like, no sense at times. I like some of the smartest people I know. I live in Massachusetts, and so you think, it's pretty liberal. It's not, though. They're all like, these liberals are so conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not. It's not like in the worldview of what a liberal would be. They're like conservatives. Like they're like center right. You know what I mean? So it surprises me sometimes. Like my husband he was a musician. He played in punk bands, so he hung out with all the punks and not the bad skinhead bands. Those I beat a lot of them up when they showed up the shows. But we had a lot of punk friends, and so then I'm like, I was doing the politics, and there's this man I know, Nathaniel Mulcahy, who he's run a couple of times in different things, but he's done a lot of environmental work, and he's been an activist for years, like decades, right, on environmental. And so I said to my friends, because he was running up there, in their area, and they're like, oh no, we like, I think it was Seth, what's his name? Seth, I can't think of his last name, but I'm like, really? He's like horrible on stuff. Like, he doesn't even support Medicare for all. And they were like, nope, we like him. And I'm like, how are you like, you're not punk.
I got into it with a bunch of John Fetterman supporters recently who were, they just kept saying he was progressive. And I'm like, he doesn't support even single payer. No. They're like, yeah, but he supports expanding healthcare and, blah, 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 all the talking points that Democrats give. I'm like, I can't stand this. Like, since the Bernie campaign, being in hardcore Democratic circles drives me crazy. I'll never do it again.
They really think that they're leftists. Like, these people, like, I couldn't believe. So, being in Massachusetts, like, I was with Boston for Bernie, and, I worked with all these people. And then come 2020, oh, do we put the band back together? Do we pull back Boston for Bernie? But half of them were now supporting Warren because she was a woman and she's from Massachusetts. And I'm like, she's freaking horrible. Like, she's so horrible. Like, what is wrong with you? How do you go from Bernie to Elizabeth Warren? Like, it doesn't make sense. I mean, Bernie is like a complete compromise. Like, you know what I mean? Like there was things I just remember in that summer of 2015 where it was like they were mad because the socialists wouldn't sign off on Bernie. Like, this was the summer of 2015. They're like, he's not a real socialist. Like, why, like, we need to see more. Like, why would we support him? And they were right. He is the closest we're going to get that's in Washington right now. But I mean, it was just like,
it's because that she's been curated for Facebook liberals to the point where they see her as the radical left. She's given out enough sound bites.
Wait, say the word. Say the word. I love. She's a girl boss.
Yeah, boss. Boss can't lose. There we go. But no, she's been curated for the left of liberal to make liberals feel like they actually matter or care about things. When if you speak economically about, say, your life on the job with a conservative person, you're gonna build a connection with them much more than you are with a liberal that, I don't know, manages a grocery store or something,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. Oh, sorry, you finish.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's why I always just try and hammer focusing on class, and focusing on workplace organizing, and just organizing at the point of production, on the shop floor, organizing at that level rather than thinking about things politically all the time. Which it's easy to do, but the political circus as it functions right now is mostly just a distraction. Yeah. We got to get people organized. We just started a series where we have people write in like stuff that happened to them at the workplace, stuff that their boss did to exploit them or whatever else. And it's interesting to hear, and like you said, everybody can agree on that. Everyone can unify about that because class and the things that the working class faces are universal. Versus, things like race, and not to say, we shouldn't engage in a racial struggle, but there's nothing universal about a race. There's like a black capitalist is so much different from a black worker versus class. Our experiences can be universal there, and therefore it is such a great tool to organize people who maybe have different views elsewhere, and get them to fight together to get something done.
Yeah. I find it face to face is much. I mean, you're not going to switch too many people's minds. Not in the sense that you're trying to directly talk, tweet with them or this. Like, I think like doing like the TikToks and talking about it is good because that like gets out to a whole bunch of people and someone's it's going to click with someone, you know what I mean? But like, if you're trying to like, if you're online with one person and you're like, no, this is what like, they're not going to listen to you. So yeah, you do like having that community and having the face to face with them and having them more like understand like, okay, we're all in this together. You know what I mean? Like we, if we can better our class, then if the class can we go classless or the hierarchies are not as drawn out and stuff like that. If we can do that and band together, that makes all that other stuff better, right. and that is really hard to do because liberals in this country have relied on identity politics and so many leftists can't foresee that. And I talk about that, like why I lean anarchism instead of communism at times, because when I don't call myself either, but I understand both. But like, I felt like the anarchism like spoke to me like personally, and I say this all the time, but it spoke to me, where communism is the community. So you have to stop. In America, we think so much of the individual. We think, of ourselves, and you have to think, okay, we got to think more community. Like, what's going to better everything in the community? Me getting $100 isn't going to better the community. Like, like, but if everyone, if everyone got $100 or something like that, like, it's like little things that you have to just think like beyond yourself, and that's where communism, like, that's one point I'm trying to make by doing this show, is like, people get a little wary of communism because of that. Like, they feel like, it doesn't speak directly to me because it doesn't speak to my identity. And I mean, that's where I come from with it. I still struggle a little with it because I'm like, I'm disabled. And, I know that there's certain things in my disabled community that need to be better and that other people don't understand. You know what I mean? But
after generations of a Red Scare, you look at communism, and what you've been shown for generations is a mass group of faceless people that all dress the same, all march in lockstep.
Yeah.
None of them have an identity of their own. But we have to meet people where they are with our propaganda, our own message. And, we're not trying to take people's identities away or their selfhood. We're just trying to make everybody rise up on the same tide.
Yeah. I understand that. What I'm saying is, I think because that is kind of what I've figured out in my brain, like why I was leaning towards more anarchism and kind of, I knew, I read communism and stuff like that, but like, I was more like, I'm more anarchist, but now I'm like, you know what? I'm probably more communist in ways that I understand that, like, no, I do believe in a community. I do believe that we can rise, like everyone can go up.
And I don't think communism takes your individualism away, but allows it to flourish. I think class consciousness is understanding that what's in the interest of the collective, as in my class, is what's in my own personal interest. Yes. And if I really, really want to flourish as a human, and have time to pursue my interests and, develop myself in various ways, I can't be at work 60 hours a week, so, we need to organize as a class against that. And, what's in the interest of the collective is then in the interest of the individual, like I said. And to your point about ableism too and disability, Lev Vygotsky, who was an educational psychologist in the Soviet Union, made so many breakthroughs that he's still taught in every educational psychology class in the West today. You can't teach educational psychology without mentioning Vygotsky. But Vygotsky in the Soviet Union was a Marxist-Leninist, and he was writing all this revolutionary stuff about education and revolutionizing the way that things are taught. When Vygotsky's works were translated in English in the US, they took out every mention of Marx and everything revolutionary he said, which included, an analysis of how the Western education system, capitalist education system, is ableist, how it puts you into it just trains you up to be a cog in the machine, regardless of what your, who you are as a person, what your skills and weaknesses are, versus the education system should be adopted to everyone, and, finding what kids' strengths are and maximizing those rather than just beating them down for not fitting into this one size fits all.
Under capitalism, I'm disabled. Under a different system, more socialist system, I'm not disabled. Like, I'm a caregiver. I take care of my father, but I'm disabled. Like, I can't go to a 9-to-5 and work, you know what I mean? So it's like that is what, like, when I finally figured that one out, like when I came to that, that's where it like kind of clicked for me, is that like, I'm called disabled here because I'm not able to make money for capitalists, you know what I mean? But I'm I'm pretty able. I garden. Like I have a lot of things I do. It's just not stuff that makes money for capitalists.
Yeah. And speaking towards the removal of revolutionary language, we've been so bombarded by Red Scare propaganda that they even took communists off of the header of the Holocaust Museum. First they came for communists. Now they changed it to first they came for socialists. It touches every single institution that we hold dear. It's all been stripped bare and for the sake of maximizing profits for a handful of people.
Yeah. It's sad.
Yeah. It influences everything, every field of study, and every institution is commodified or a bourgeois institution for the most part. So,
yeah. It's hard. But once you can start, like, you get over that, you get over the hump, and you can start actually thinking about how life would be. Like, if you actually understand, like, what communism was like under, the Soviets and under China and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It may seem scary and it may seem like, it's going to take away so much from you, but it doesn't really. I mean, it doesn't. Like, as long as you have, like, what you need to live, like a lot of people in America don't have what they need to live. Yeah. GoFundMe's and I see people like asking for money constantly. And I mean, I'm in the, being in the chronically ill group, like that happens even more. But I mean, it's happening all over the place. Like people.
Yeah, we need to speak more to people's individualism, and that if you only worked 30 hours a week, if you didn't do work that was pointless or harmful to the environment, if you had all this free time, you didn't have to worry about medical bills. Imagine what you could do, what your passions are as an individual, what you could pursue if you didn't have to devote most of your life to making profits for other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of that Stephen Jay Gould quote. He's some kind of scientist, like an anthropologist or something.
Yeah.
But he said, I'm less concerned with the machinations of Einstein's mind and more concerned with the, certainty that people with the same abilities as Einstein died in a sweatshop or, on an assembly line or in a field.
Yeah.
Like communism and socialism capitalism is such a waste of innovation and potential. Communism and socialism is designing society to max out humanity's potential.
I know it's such a joke when they try to say like you can't. They don't have they don't make things in like under communism. They don't come up with things. We're the one capitalism. That's what, that does and it just like makes me laugh because I'm like, what are you talking about? Like I mean, all I have to think of is Tesla, versus. And what they did to Nikola Tesla. Like, I mean, no, they totally will squash ideas if they don't like them. And they could be the best ideas in the world.
Capitalism just uses the structures of their institutions to leech whatever profit they can off of people's innovations.
Yeah, I mean, a good example in healthcare is Frederick Banting, the person who invented insulin, sold the patent for $2.
Yeah.
And he said, insulin shouldn't belong to me. It should belong to the world. And since then, corporations have gotten a hold of and monopolized insulin production. And now the cost is through the roof. And politicians don't want to do anything about it because the pharmaceutical companies who make insulin spend millions of dollars lobbying the government. They pay for the politicians' campaigns, and they literally write the bills. Lobbyists often write the bills themselves.
It's absolutely ridiculous. We just had that baby formula shortage. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
We had just weaned our youngest one off of bottles, off of the formula, so it didn't strike us personally. But there were people, doing crazy things to keep their children alive.
Yeah.
Because it was something like 60% of all the baby formula was in 2 plants in the United States.
Yep.
And it's run for profit, of course. So when they're
I think it was more than 60. I think it was like 90%, to be honest. It was huge.
something ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to cut corners to maximize profits because that's the only driving force to capitalism. And so when they cut those corners and they're killing babies because of unsafe formula and get shut down, then everybody's blaming the government for shutting it down.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, disconnect. We have to find how to tell people the reality. And
yeah. Well, I mean, if the railroad, if they go on strike, it's gonna be the strikers that are gonna get blamed if, for shortages and stuff like that. It's not gonna be the corporations who have made tons of money since the pandemic in railroad and are worried, like want these people to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
I feel like the longer a strike goes on, the more sympathy the public gets for that movement. At first, they're gonna see people striking and get annoyed that they're standing out there or they're not working. Like, we gotta work. Why can't they work? But after it goes on, and they see the strikers are still at it and and doing what they can to make a better life for themselves, then people get more sympathetic with the strikers.
Yeah. And I think them killing off the unions and, the unions are not great in the United States anymore, but them killing them off too. So you have less people that have worked in a union to really understand that, like to understand having, because it's a community. It really is like you all get a vote. It's the closest thing you're going to get to a democracy in the United States, even though they don't listen to them anymore. But the rank and file can scream and yell and say, no, we don't want to do this. And
these right to work laws have decimated our outreach for unions and our power.
Absolutely. And that's a good point about people aren't used to unions, or they don't even know what they're about anymore, which my buddy's actually in the rail union. He's like, he's made tons and tons of progress with his coworkers in getting them more involved and more organized. But he's like, nobody even knew how the union worked. The first thing I had to do was study how it worked.
Yeah.
Study who the people within the bureaucracy were and what their positions were, and not, and then his main job became to educate his coworkers on how the union worked, how they could use it. Because a lot of people don't even know how to use it for their interests. And, there's a lot of workers who have internalized Fox News propaganda, and they think that unions are literally bad. Like, unions, because they got to pay union dues, it's going to make their life worse or make their living standard worse. It's like, it couldn't be further from the truth.
No, it's we need like modern day Mother Jones, Ben Fletcher, Joe Hill, and Eugene Debs, and then
yeah,
I don't know. We need people to be going around. We need the agitators. We need the ones that get people to understand what the unions are. They're doing a good job with the Starbucks, I guess. But it's a little shop by shop, which is only a few people. You're only talking like less than 20 people in each shop. But yeah, we lost so much with that. Like, we lost so much with when the unions just kind of I don't know, the middle management of unions is horrible.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and we're talking about unions. Eddie wanted to know about unions from you.
Oh, I don't. I'm not in a union shop right now, and I'm real hesitant about agitating at the workplace because of the risk to my employment, and then the risk that would transfer to my children.
Yeah. No, and that makes it hard too when you have a family and stuff, and that's why you need either the older people or the younger people doing it too, like a lot of the that type of work. But you like you're saying because like you can work, you're working basically near your home, so you're not on the road trucking and taken away from your family and stuff like that too. So it's a little different too. Like you kind of want to keep the job that you're at because you don't want to end up having to travel, cross country and stuff like that.
I'm 40 years old. I've been at this job for 5 years, and until I started working here, and around the same time I started working there. Duck, that's enough. Sorry, corgi. I got sober and married my wife, and up until that point, I had lived in abject poverty my entire life, and I'm at a really good place right now, and I'm not willing to take on the risk necessary to organize, agitate, and risk losing my job because the law doesn't mean anything to corporations. Yeah. They can fire people for agitating, even if it's against the law. We watched Biden, like, we knew that Amazon was doing, union busting, and Biden wasn't going to do anything about it. Yeah. Starbucks did union busting. It's like, and it's also doing it, but it's also the people you work with. There's a cement factory down the street from my plant that went on strike for a few weeks, and I'd drop off donuts every couple. And walking out of the break room one day, I heard a couple of my coworkers talking about them striking, and one said something like, "You know how to take care of those strikers? I have a couple AR-15s that would take care of it." And the other one was giggling about it. Like, how do you confront someone like that and ask them to join a union?
Yeah, it is like there has to be some education on this because, yeah,
but it's so deeply embedded in so many people, and especially in traditionally masculine workplaces.
I remember my nephew's like he's like your age, and he was going through he was becoming an electrician, and he was kind of coming down on the union stuff, and I'm like, why? And he's like, I'm like, it's there for like, yeah, it is tough when you first join a union. You don't feel like you're getting benefits from it, but the long you're, once you reach that point, like my cousin's working in a union right now, and so she has to like, I think she just became like 6 months ago, so I think she has like another 6 months before she's like totally in, like totally vested or something like that. So it is like you kind of like with a lot of the unions, it's like at the beginning you don't totally feel it either. So it's hard because people need to understand though, like you have so much more power in a union than you do without. I mean, they can do whatever they do, pretty much whatever they want with you while you're in a union, but it's a lot less than what they can do to you without one. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and the new thing they're doing is making everyone a private contractor, so you're technically not even an employee. So they're supposed to legally let you form a union, collectively bargain, but not if you're a private contractor. And then with the trucking industry, I've had a lot of friends who worked in it, so that's kind of why I wanted to ask about it, because I've studied the industry a little bit, and it's interesting. You have the owner operators, people who own their own trucks, so they're almost then like a small businessman rather than an employee, which is another barrier to unionization. And then like at the company my buddies worked at, they had some people who were employed by the company versus some who were owner operators, so there's no coherence there. It makes it really hard to collectively bargain.
Yeah I worked for a trucking company, and it was like that. It was half employees and half contracts out and stuff like that.
There's also the physicality of being, when you're driving truck, you're working by yourself for 10, 12-hour days. You're not sitting with a coworker or on break with a bunch of coworkers to compare your stories of the day. Yeah,
you're not like relying on them either to get like you're not, you're doing just your thing. They do just their thing. It's not like you're working together, So it is. Yeah, I guess that would be a little harder for them to really get into it and stuff. But I think there should be unions for like everything. I mean, rent unions and just anything like that. Like anything that to protect you from anything, like student unions, like everyone can have a union. It's your community. But so anything else we wanted to bring up tonight? Anyone?
I don't think so, unless you guys had anything.
You want to tell us a little bit about your YouTube channel, Midwestern Marks?
Yeah.
Or Marks Midwest? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. Our YouTube channel is Midwestern Marks. Yeah, we've been doing the YouTube and Twitch thing lately, doing a lot of streams and breaking down news and politics and theory with my buddy Carlos, who's a philosophy professor in Illinois right now, who started the website with me. And then we got our website, MidwesternMarks.com, where we publish regular articles and also educational videos. And then we also have our own publishing press now. So right there is the journal we publish, Journal of American Socialist Studies. So the sequel's coming soon.
Yeah, I'll go and look that up and probably get that. So that's fine. What's up?
Yeah. One quick thing. Is it true that Bill Gates has the world's largest collection of foreskins? That's what I heard.
I didn't come across that in my research, but now I think I might have to find out.
I don't even want to know. I used to work for this magazine, telecommunications magazine. And it was in the early 90s. And it was like right when people are starting to get on the internet and stuff. And they would make fun of me because I'd be like, oh, Bill Gates is rich. I'll marry him or something like that. Like I would just like say it and joking. So all the editors and stuff would like come up and like leave pictures of him in my cube. And then my editor-in-chief would not let me go to the show because he thought I'd flirt with Bill Gates. I'm like, are you freaking serious? Bill Gates, like I don't want him.
And you don't have the foreskin.
Yeah, right. I didn't have a foreskin. I mean, if I knew, I would have brought him a foreskin. And then
yeah, exactly. Great way.
It would have been Bill and Janet found it. I couldn't do that. I could not do that. Oh my God. No. But yeah, I don't even know why you know why? Because my edibles are starting to kick in.
There we go.
Well, this is where Commie Trucker knows that we need to end the show. I decided I only wanted to do an hour show, so I take my edibles right at the beginning of the show, and then we
kick in.
Oh,
that's perfect.
It's a perfect. So I don't have to suffer any longer. She doesn't have to suffer.
No. So, all right, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I hope Eddie comes back too. And anytime you have an article, anything you want to come by and talk to us.
Absolutely. Thanks you so much for coming on, Eddie. You're great. I love your work. Keep it up, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. You guys mind if I re-upload this on YouTube and I'll leave a link to your channel?
No problem.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.